All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, complicated puzzles in all of criminal law. It's this. What happens when one person commits a whole bunch of crimes? Now, you might think it's simple, right? You just add up the sentences. But nope, it's way more intricate than that. The law has this whole complex system for figuring it out. And in this explainer, we are going to unpack it and make it all make sense. So let's just jump right in with a scenario that gets to the absolute heart of the problem. Picture this. A person throws a single hand grenade into a crowd. Just one action. But that one action causes, say, 20 deaths and a dozen more injuries. So how does the law see this? Is it one single catastrophic crime, or is it 20 separate murders plus a bunch of attempted murders? How you answer that question, well, that's the key that unlocks this entire concept of a plurality of crimes.
And there it is. That's the official term for what we're digging into, plurality of crimes. It's really just the legal system's rulebook for bringing some kind of order to the absolute chaos of real-world crime. It's built to handle everything, whether it's that one explosive act with tons of consequences, a series of linked actions, or even totally separate and unrelated offenses.
Now, to make this whole thing feel a lot more intuitive, we're going to lean on one central metaphor for this entire explainer: a chef in a kitchen. Just imagine the criminal acts are the ingredients, the actions the chef takes. The legal classification, how we categorize the plurality of crimes, is basically us figuring out what the chef was actually trying to cook. Were they making one super complex, multi-step dish, or were they putting together a whole multi-course meal? Or maybe they just ordered off a preset menu. Stick with this idea. It's going to be our guide through all of this.
So where does the legal system even begin to untangle this knot? It all comes down to one single fundamental question. What was going on in the criminal's mind? What was their intent? This is the starting line, the absolute fork in the road. The answer to this question sends us down one of two very different paths for how the law is going to view and ultimately punish those crimes. So path number one is what's called formal plurality. This is what happens when one single act, like our grenade, leads to multiple serious crimes. But the key here, and I can't stress this enough, is the phrase unitary criminal intent. That means behind all of that chaos, there was one single unified criminal idea. One impulse was driving the whole thing. The crimes aren't seen as a bunch of separate events, they're all just the interconnected results of one single corrupt purpose.
Let's go back to our chef. Formal plurality is like our chef deciding to make one single, really impressive but very complicated dish. Let's say a beef Wellington. You've got so many steps, right? You've got to sear the beef, then you make the mushroom duxelles, then you wrap it all in prosciutto, then you got to encase the whole thing in pastry. Each of those is a distinct action, but they are all part of one single unified plan, all driven by a single intent, to create one amazing beef Wellington. That's formal plurality in a nutshell. Multiple criminal results, but they're all just steps in one master plan.
Okay, so what's behind door number two? That's material or real plurality. And it's pretty much the exact opposite. This is when a person commits two or more crimes, but each one is powered by its own separate, distinct criminal engine. There's no single overarching plan that connects them. Each crime was its own independent decision with its own unique reason for being.
Back in the kitchen, this is our chef making a full 3-course meal. First, the chef decides, I'm going to make a soup. That's one intent, one project. Once the soup is simmering, they decide, okay, now for the main course, I'm going to grill a steak. That's a second, totally separate intent. And finally, they think, you know what? Let's make a dessert, a third intent. Each dish is a distinct creation with its own purpose. And if you were a food critic, you'd judge each one, the soup, the steak, the dessert, separately. That is the soul of material plurality. And this table really just boils it all down perfectly. But I want you to focus on that last row, penalty. This is where the rubber meets the road. With formal plurality, that single intent, the beef Wellington, you get punished once just for the most serious crime. But with material plurality, the 3-course meal, every separate intent gets you a separate penalty. They stack up. And that right there is why this distinction is so incredibly important. It directly changes the final sentence. Okay, so let's take a walk down that first path. We're now officially in the world of formal plurality, where every single thing stems from that one unitary criminal intent. What's the philosophy here? What legal machinery makes this world turn? Let's find out.
The engine that drives this entire path is something called the doctrine of absorption. And really, at its core, it's all about fairness. It's a principle that stops the state from punishing someone over and over and over again for what was essentially a single criminal impulse.
The law here is trying to punish the intent, the guilty mind, not just rack up points for every single bad thing that happened because of it.
So the why behind it is pretty clear. Punish the main goal. The more serious crime essentially swallows up or absorbs the lesser ones that came along for the ride. This makes sure that the punishment fits the crime, that it's proportional to that single criminal decision. You can also think of it as a check on the state's power, keeping prosecutors from just unfairly stacking charges when everything really came from one moment of bad judgment. Now, this whole logic of a single unified intent gives birth to two specific legal categories. These are compound crimes and complex crimes proper. Let's break down what each of those means. So first up, we have the compound crime. The definition here is just beautifully simple and direct. It's when one single physical act results in two or more serious felonies. This is the perfect legal box for our one grenade, multiple victim scenario. One action, a whole bunch of serious criminal consequences. And these examples just make it crystal clear. Yeah, the grenade is the classic case, but look at the others. A single punch that results in both a broken jaw and a serious concussion. One gunshot that rips through one victim and tragically hits and kills another person behind them. Or even a single act of reckless driving that causes both a death and multiple injuries. You see the pattern in all of them, right? One single physical event leads to a plurality of legally recognized crimes. Okay, the second form is what's called a complex crime proper. Now, this one's a little more nuanced. We're still in the world of single criminal intent, but the structure of the crime is different. This is when one crime is committed specifically as a necessary means to pull off another crime. So think of it like a criminal using a specific key to unlock a door. The first crime is the key. The second crime is the room they were trying to get into all along. The textbook example you'll always hear is faking a document to commit fraud, or what the law often calls estafa. So picture this. Someone creates a completely fake deed of sale for a piece of property. That act right there is crime number one, falsification of a document. Then they take that fake deed and use it to trick someone into giving them money. That's crime number two, estafa. The falsification wasn't some separate random idea. It was the essential tool, the necessary means they chose to accomplish the main goal, which was the fraud. And this is a really crucial point. When the law says necessary means, it doesn't mean it was the only possible way in the universe to commit the second crime. The real question is this. In the actual plan that the offender came up with, was that first crime an integral part of pulling off the second? If the fraudster chose to use a fake document as their method, and that fake document was essential to their specific plan, then it qualifies. Now let's look at a real historical case that makes this just pop. In a case called U.S. v. Hernandez, a man wanted to seduce a 15-year-old girl. So what was his plan? He committed the crime of usurpation of official functions by pretending to be a priest. He even staged a whole fake marriage ceremony. This entire deception, this first crime, was the necessary means he used to accomplish his actual goal, the seduction. The court looked at this whole situation and didn't see two separate crimes. They saw one complex crime proper. The fake priesthood was the key that unlocked the door to the second crime. All right, we've really explored the world of single intent. So now, let's cross that dividing line. We're going over to the other side of the decision tree and entering the world of multiple separate intentions. And this is the world of material plurality. We're back with our chef, but this time, he's deliberately making that multi-course meal. Every single crime is its own dish. Each one is planned separately, it's executed separately, and, this is the most important part, it's judged and punished separately. There's no absorption here. There's no swallowing the lesser crime. Each crime stands on its own 2 feet and faces its own penalty. These examples really drive the point home. In every single one of these, you can see a moment where a new, distinct criminal intent is born after the first crime is already done. So, stealing public funds, that's one intent. But then the later decision to kill an auditor to cover your tracks, that's a completely separate criminal thought. It's born from a new motive, self-preservation, and that leads to a totally separate charge and a separate punishment. Okay, so we have our two main highways, single intent and multiple intents. But the law, over time, recognized that some combinations of crimes happen so often and they're so uniquely terrible that they needed their own special set of rules. Think of these as the exceptions to the rule, the special categories that exist outside the normal flowchart. And these are called special complex crimes. Essentially, lawmakers have looked at certain criminal scenarios and just said, you know what? This specific combination of acts is so horrific that we are going to treat it as one single indivisible crime from now on. They've packaged these offenses together and stamped a single, specific, and almost always very, very severe penalty on the box.
Let's go back to our chef one last time. Special complex crimes are the set menu items in the law's cookbook. You can't order them à la carte. If you commit the specific acts that make up, say, robbery with homicide, you are getting the full set menu whether you like it or not. The law has already decided on the ingredients, the name of the dish, and the price, which is the penalty. It's all fixed, non-negotiable. And here are the most infamous items on that very dark menu. You see the pattern, right? They all combine another very serious felony, like robbery, kidnapping, or rape, with the death of a victim. The law treats these specific, tragic combinations as single, indivisible crimes, simply because of their inherent gravity. But here's where the logic of these special crimes gets really unique, and it's a critical point. Take robbery with homicide. Your original intent might have just been to rob a bank. You have no intention of killing anyone. But if, during that robbery, someone dies, maybe they have a heart attack, maybe a stray bullet hits them by accident, the law does not care what your original intent was. The death happened by reason of, or on the occasion of, the robbery. And because of that, you are guilty of this special complex crime. It is a brutal but very clear legal rule. There's one more special category we've got to cover. It's called a continued crime, or in the original Latin, delito continuato. This is for situations where you have a whole series of separate criminal acts, but they're all connected, all part of one single persistent criminal idea. So it's a plurality of actions, but a unity of intent. Our chef metaphor works perfectly here. Imagine our chef decides to make a huge batch of chocolate chip cookies. They perform many small, distinct acts. They scoop the dough, they place it on the sheet, they do it again and again and again. Now, each scoop is technically a separate act, but are they making 50 different individual cookies? No. They are driven by one single goal, to produce one batch of cookies. That's a continued crime. Now, it is so important not to confuse a continued crime with a very similar sounding term, a continuing crime. A continued crime involves multiple distinct acts over time, like that example of stealing 13 cows from one place all at once. That's a series of little acts that make one crime. A continuing crime is a single, uninterrupted, unlawful act that stretches over time, like the crime of rebellion. So think of it this way. A continued crime is like a flipbook, lots of individual pictures that create one motion. A continuing crime is like a single, long-exposure photograph. Wow. Okay, we have covered a huge amount of ground here. We've gone through the two paths of intent, the doctrine of absorption, complex crimes, those special set menu crimes, and continued crimes. So now let's pull all of this together into a practical, step-by-step guide you can actually use to analyze any scenario you might come across. So here it is, your cheat sheet to put it all together. And you'll notice it always begins with step 1. Identify the acts and, most crucially, the nature of the intent. Was it singular or was it multiple? That's your fork in the road. And from there, you just follow the logic down the path. You check for continued crimes, you consider complex crimes, you apply the absorption doctrine, and you always look out for those special, predefined set menu items to find the right classification. And that really brings us to our final thought for today. This entire incredibly intricate system, with all of its different branches and exceptions and special rules, it's all designed with a really noble goal: fairness. It's an attempt to make the punishment truly fit the criminal's culpability, what was in their mind. But we have to ask the question, in all of this complexity, does the system actually achieve that goal? Or does it risk creating so many legal nooks and crannies that it creates loopholes and actually obscures the path to simple, clear justice? And that is the question this whole framework really leaves us with.